Good evening. I am Kumud Srinivasan, President of Intel India. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the opening dinner of GlobalNet's inaugural meeting. Returning to India after 30 plus years, I am delighted to be a part of this rich and vibrant discussion. Tonight, we present to you a conversation on global strategies for the new MNCs. Participating in this conversation are Ronnie Chan, Chairman, Hang Lung Properties Hong Kong, Gautam Thapar, Chairman, Aspen Institute India, Chairman and CEO, Avantha Group India. The conversation will be moderated by Claude Smadja. Over to you, Claude.
Thank you, Kumud. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. As Yael mentioned before, you had cocktails, but I think the real treat is now in the discussion between these two gentlemen. I think that if you want to think about two global business leaders with really a global perspective, they are here in front of you. In two sentences, Gautam Thapar is, as many of you know, one of the most prominent business leaders in India, but also with activities in different parts of the world. Gautam made his studies first in India and then had a degree of engineering from the United States. He started, strangely enough, as a factory assistant in one of the factories of Avantha, and then made his way up to the top of the ladder, and in 2007, if I'm not mistaken, became the chairman and CEO of the group. And what is remarkable with Gautam is that he not only achieved an incredible restructuring, re-engineering, reboosting of the activities of Avantha, but he also deeply, very, very intensely involved himself in something he believes very deeply in, which is the notion of corporate responsibility. And he didn't just do that. He didn't just do that just in a kind of academic, theoretical manner. He has deeply involved himself in activities related to leadership development, sport, education, and he created the Thapar University, which is today one of the most prominent institutions in technical education. And so now, if I turn to Ronnie Chan, I have known now Ronnie for 23 years or 24 years. And I would say also, if somebody can be in a way defined as a global business leader, this is also somebody like Ronnie. Ronnie is not only one of the big business figures in Hong Kong, but he is also a big business figure in in China, the Hang Lung Group, or in different brands. He has many activities in different parts of the world. He has been on many occasions called to testify before the US Congress on China-US relations, and not only being a very successful business leader, as Gautam, he shares also this notion of the responsibility of business leader. Ronnie has been involved in something called, if I'm not mistaken, the Cultural Heritage Foundation, which has been very active in cultural renovation in China. Ronnie and has been sponsoring education for quite a number of students, and is also involved in a number of philanthropic organizations and activities, I would say, rather than organizations. So in a way, you have two business leaders here who are part of this world that we now call the new constellation of growth, and who are not only accomplished, successful business leaders, but leaders who contribute to society as a whole. But what I would like to do now is, in a way, since I want to continue the flow of the discussion since the beginning of the afternoon, is to turn to both of you, and in a way, when we speak about the new MNCs, we speak about them as real game changers in the global business landscape. Let me first ask you, Gautam, and I will then turn to Ronnie. In a way, how do you shape the global strategy of MNCs like yours? What are the key elements? What are the key criteria? What are the key priorities that, in a way, are guiding the strategic thinking when you look at the development of a group like yours?
Sorry, Claude, before I answer, maybe one clarification or correction. I didn't start Thapar University, actually. My grandfather started it in 1956. So I've just kept on a tradition of trusteeship, and it has grown into today one of the largest private science and engineering institutes in the country. But coming back to your question, I think that we have to go back in time to 1991 and the so-called liberalization of the Indian economy and the reactions to that. What is not very often understood is that in the first step of liberalization, it was actually the manufacturing sector in India that got hit the hardest, because based upon the formula given by the IMF and our obligations under the WTO, which didn't cover services, duties on manufacturing goods crashed almost overnight. So globalization for us, actually, and I run 9 different companies, so it varies across different businesses. But for the 2 largest businesses, it became a matter of survival. Our largest business actually today, our most global business, is in power equipment, in the distribution, generation, conversion, and the usage of electricity. We don't generate, we don't make turbines, but we make everything downstream from turbines. And in India, when liberalization happened in 91, Siemens, ABB, Alstom, GE, Toshiba, Hitachi, all were present in India, and some of them had been present in India for 50 years. So in a country that had been starved of research and development, especially in the private sector, where we didn't have customers who would drive our development, our growth, who were not early movers and adapters in technology, how do you compete against people who have all of that in plenty around the world? And even though we have the advantage of being an Indian company in the Indian market, we recognize things would start changing. So for us, it was a bit of retooling, and then we needed to acquire companies that could bring us technology, but more importantly, we needed to acquire customers who would actually make us look at what we were doing and understand it a little better, and also then bring that experience back to India in almost a counterintuitive way, and go back to our Indian partners in the grid and all, and say, this is what we can do for you, this is what we can offer you, and that's it. And that was the first step of what we did. Started in 2006. Since 2006, Crompton Greaves, which is the company that I'm talking about, has done 9 acquisitions around the world. We operate now in 32 countries around the world. We have manufacturing facilities in 14 countries around the world, and it's a mix between the West and the East. We are in Indonesia, we are in Saudi Arabia, we are in Brazil, we are also in Hungary, Belgium, Sweden, Canada, United States. So, and it's growing every year, more or less. We add a new country, or we add a new company.
And what is guiding this acquisition strategy, covering the globe or selecting countries, target country as a specific?
First and foremost, it's always been technology. That has been the biggest driver for us, is that we have a suite of products and we need to fill in gaps, because we've lacked research and development funding for, we're basically underfunded on research and development for 30, 40 years. We're not going to catch that up by putting more and more money into research. So we need to go out and find some things to fill the holes in the technology portfolio, which we've done. The next question is, how do you address yourself now to a global customer? We do about slightly over $1.5 billion in global sales in transmission and distribution equipment. And we need global customers to drive that. And the biggest global customers are grids around the world. There are 20 super grids in the world who basically run the power system around the world. Power Grid is one of them. Aeon is one of them. ADF in France is one of them. You're not just going to come into these guys and say, you know, hey, I'm a low-cost producer out of India. Please give me business. That's never works. You know, it's enough for them to listen to you politely, but you go out. So it's been then about fixing that gap, putting in place a management system, which we're going through right now, that you look at companies, markets specifically in a very different way, and the products just fill in there. The underlying thing behind this is that our strong belief that India in the medium term will be one of the low-cost manufacturing centers of the world, especially for this kind of equipment. And we are beginning to see some of the results of that coming through. So you have a large Indian market, it's a growing Indian market, the need for electricity in India is enormous, the grid will grow, we are spending, well, at last count we're going to spend more than $130 billion over the next 25 years in basically growing the grid. We already have a 23% share of that market. That's enough to keep us going for the next 25 years in a certain sense. Now we need to bring in the rest of the world. We need to bring the best technology, best customers who can drive that technology and translate that experience. And ultimately, India should be, for Crompton Greaves at least, a manufacturing hub for the world.
Thank you. Ronnie, you are in a different sector. At the same time, you have been also developing the Hang Lung Corporation or group, whatever we want to call it, into a corporation, a company which has so many, I would say, activities, but at the same time expansion. When I look at what you have been doing in China since the mid-90s, if I'm not mistaken, the results has been quite astonishing. So when you look at that, what is guiding your strategy? What are again your priorities or your guiding principle into that?
Sorry, Claude, I have to, number one, apologize. I was on TV just now, that's why I couldn't be here. Number two, also a correction, I follow Gautam. That is, I testify in many places, but not quite in the US Congress yet, on China.
Sorry.
But number three, Claude, you owe me a big one. He told me 2 days ago he wanted me to share the podium with Gautam. He said he's a really bright guy, really smart guy. I said, oh, okay, fine. I feel inferiority complex already. He didn't tell me that he's a lot younger and he's a lot taller and a lot more handsome. Oh gosh, I'm really suffering right now, so I'm sorry. So if I begin to speak nonsense, okay, forgive me. You know, my company went the opposite direction. You know, we used to be in 18 countries around the world. In fact, at that time, I invited Claude to join my board, between 87 and 2000, we probably acquired 100-some companies around the world, mostly in Europe and in North America. And so, you know, we were going gung-ho in the internationalization, but by 2000, we decided to go the opposite direction. So allow me to answer your question this way. You know, of observing what has happened in the world, in particular China, where I operate a lot, I mean, it is really a new phenomenon that, you know, in the old days, MNCs, multinational corporations, are the purviews of developed economies. Yeah. You don't hear them from India, China, even Brazil. You don't hear about them. But it is truly amazing how that these days, for several reasons, that MNCs are suddenly bursting into the global scene. Now, obviously, technology is one of them. Let me just cite you one example. There is a company in China. Many of you have heard of Alibaba, but this is just a subsidiary of Alibaba. They sold $32 billion of goods last year. And that's bigger, I was told, than the combine of eBay and Amazon. And so technology is one thing that really enables developing economies to grow very, very big MNC companies. The second one, and you can imagine that thing can then be translated to transferred to other countries eventually. Then the second one is that most of these MNCs in developing economies come from big countries like India, like China. And the reason is obvious. China has the market, and China has the manufacturing base. I mean, you consider the fact that Geely, a car company, because it has a manufacturing base in China, it bought Volvo. Another two companies joined together, almost bought Saab, right? Lenovo, they make computers, PC computers. Because of the huge manufacturing capability they have in mainland China, they bought the IBM PC division, right? So that is based on the big manufacturing capacity back home. And the other one is, of course, the huge domestic market. And you'll be shocked by my next 3 sentences. I was asked to lead a delegation of top Chinese entrepreneurs to Israel 3 months ago. And 15, 20 companies, high-tech companies, you know, Israel is very proud of their high-tech companies. And they paraded in front of us, 20 of us, 19 of them, plus myself, mainland Chinese entrepreneurs. To the last one, every technology we saw in Israel, there's already an equivalent in China. Now, obviously, right away, people's reaction is, oh, of course, Israel is far superior. Maybe. I don't know. I have no basis to judge. But let's assume that it is. But then you consider the fact that why are the Israelis wanting me to bring these mainland Chinese guys there? Because they recognize that it will not be the Israeli companies that will buy the Chinese equivalent and enter into the market. They don't know that market. It is the Chinese companies, the Chinese technology companies, which may have inferior technology. Let's assume that for the time being. Because of the size of the market, they have the financial strength. And those guys will eventually buy a lot of the Israeli companies, high-tech companies, and then use their technology and use it to go back to the mainland Chinese company, mainland Chinese market, as well as to hit the rest of the world. So truly, the developing economy MNCs is a thing that the world has to get used to. They don't know what it is, get used to it. I couldn't believe it. 1990s, the Japanese began to hit the international scene, right? That's not too long ago. And then little did we know that 10 years later, that the Chinese, the Indians, should be doing exactly what Japan has done, only 15, 20 years ago. So I think the whole global economy is affected by the emergence of these MNCs from emerging markets.
Back to one point, you have spoken about China. What has guided you in your strategy of going into the Chinese market and expanding as you have been doing it over the last few years?
It's very simple. China, the market is so darn big that nobody is anybody. I don't care who you are. I don't care how big you are. When you go into the Chinese market, you're nobody. And you know, everybody has financial limitations. Right now, I'm spending about $11 billion building all kinds of stuff in the mainland of China. And that market is so big that you can have 10 of us, 20 of us, and we'll have no problem absorbing it. And let me tell you one other thing. The market is so crazy in these developing economies that for the last 7 years in real estate, I have had zero debt. And I can do the $11 billion project, which I'm doing right now. By the time I'm finished, I'll still be a debt equity ratio of probably no more than 10%. And the size of the market is mind-boggling.
Would you say the same thing about the Indian market that Ronnie is saying about the Chinese market?
No. We are a large market, but it's a very disaggregated market, and it's not easy to find the scale and size that you're looking for. It's also the stage of development you're in, because our infrastructure is way behind, and even sitting here today, the 4 southern states of India are not connected to the national grid. So when you talk about selling electricity, I can generate electricity in the cheapest parts of Northeast India, but I cannot ship it to South India where they can use it. So we still have a ways to go, but ultimately just the sheer size of the economy, the sheer size of people, we will get to where, China is today, maybe 5, maybe 7, maybe 6, maybe 10 years down the line. At that point in time, you should be ready, very, very clearly ready. You should have chalked out the parts of the country and the parts of the industry that you want to play in, and be ready to influence that part. And I think you're getting to that stage now where a lot of Indian companies, especially domestic companies, are beginning to consolidate their position in a number of different industries, and you'll see the growth.
But you said that you have 25% or 23%.
23% of the pie.
That's pretty significant.
It is significant.
It's a big country.
Yeah, it's a big country, but at the end, let's put it this way: we've had a coal scam, so to speak, for the last, which happened last year. Now the setback of that in policy terms is enormous. It stops investment, it stops things happening. So here you are, a private sector company, you're gearing up for 8, 10, 12% growth, and suddenly everything comes to a grinding halt. And by the time these things get sorted out, it'll take a year, year and a half to, for things to go by. We were looking in an environment 2.5 years ago where inflation was still manageable, interest rates were manageable. You had a real interest rate of maybe 1 or 2%. That changed. You are now in an environment where you have real interest rates of 4 or 5%. The world of capital has changed. The cost of capital has crashed in the US, it's crashed in Japan, it's actually risen in India. So all of these things start playing in, and as the Indian market for power equipment increases, so does the global competition that comes into the market also starts increasing. So not having a policy framework that allows for a continuous and a smooth growth is a huge problem. We can't go from 9% 2 years ago to 5% and then swim along at 5% and then suddenly go back up to 7, 8%. For private sector firms and for anybody who's looking for capital, it becomes very difficult to plan. So it's going to be a challenge for a lot of Indian manufacturing companies going forward, that we have not, in my opinion, in many industries yet reached that critical mass where you can say that 5% is good enough for us to continue to be able to plan for doing billions of dollars of business every year, because the policy framework now allows you to do that.
Let me follow up on some things that both of you said in different ways. On the one hand, you have been talking about the need for a company like yours to acquire technology to develop R&D capabilities. At the same time, Ronnie was talking about the shrinking of the acquisition of knowledge, in terms of time to knowledge has shrunk in an incredible way. To what extent, given this element, given the kind of rapid way companies like yours, both of you, are developing, expanding in different areas, but nevertheless expanding very fast, being very agile, in what way are you really game changers? Ronnie has alluded to that, but I would like both of you to in a way define or explain or elaborate how, in a way, your activities, your company, the way you look at expansion strategies are really changing the global competition game.
Well, again, the strength with which we go and talk to global customers today obviously derives off our domestic base, and the fact that actually there's fierce competition in this market as well. So having acquired technology, we've already come to the next stage of development in terms of the product, and it seems to be moving for us at least in sync with what's happening around the world, especially now. In Europe, we see a very interesting phenomenon. Governments don't have money, but companies have money. So governments are not spending, but we're finding that companies are still spending and they're out there spending money. So when we look at these sort of phenomena becoming a game changer, I think it's a bit early days, at least as far as we are concerned. But what I do know for a fact is that not a single one of the MNCs that out of the developed markets that I mentioned when I started is not tracking what we do around the world. So if there's one thing that we do know, we are no longer a company that they consider coming from a third world or an emerging market. We are a company that's causing some serious disruptions in their home markets, competing with products that today are equivalent to what they can sell but we have a much more open source approach to things. So you buy our equipment, it doesn't matter whether you have equipment from Siemens or ABB or Alstom. We can give you this equipment, we can give it to you at the right quality, the right delivery, but more importantly, we give you the right price, and you don't need to go in and change everything just to buy our equipment. And that's becoming a bit of a game changer when we start talking in those markets.
And then you are complementing that by a very aggressive strategy of acquisitions.
We have, yes. And investment. I mean, we've acquired and we've invested. We've acquired and we've invested. Our next thing is going to be a big manufacturing investment in this, actually in India, which is, in a way, it drives back to the faith that we have, that ultimately this will be a market for, we have built the international network, we've built the global customers, we now want to service them from a low-cost market.
Ronnie, elaborate on this.
Well, the one beautiful thing about working in these emerging or re-emerging economy is that you don't need to be a genius. All you need to do is bring what other people have done elsewhere and adapt.
Yeah, correct.
You may not be able to bring it exactly what it is, but if you were to learn from them and adapt it in your country, that in itself is going to be very, very powerful, and you can make a lot of money doing that. I'll give you an example. Brands, Western brands. A lot of Western brands consider China as the biggest market. They have overtaken Japan, overtaken America, fashion brands, as the biggest market in the world. Do you know that a lot of them are now bought by Chinese companies? Karl Lagerfeld is owned by a Chinese company. Who else? Michael Kors is owned by a Chinese company. And so these Chinese guys, because of the big market that they enjoy, and after you establish yourself in your home market, if it is big enough, you will have the financial resource to turn around and acquire from overseas whatever is there, including some of the most valuable brands. And I'll be happy to bet you that they will not change the Chinese brand's name in the Karl Lagerfeld. They will have both brands. Nor would they give up, of course, the brand name from the West. But you may not know it. But you may be buying an Italian brand, but sorry, it is actually owned by the Chinese. So, those kind of things, the whole world is becoming a very integrated. And just that in the old days, the emerging economies were not a player. Now they are. And just like we had to get used to the Japanese, 20 years ago, you might as well get used to the Indians, the Chinese, and the others.
Thank you. Gautam, Ronnie, I would like to thank you very much for your thoughts. I think it provides quite a good conclusion to our discussions this whole afternoon. We have had, I would say, quite an intensive schedule for an opening day of this inaugural meeting of the GrowthNet. So I would like to invite all of you to join me in giving a big hand to Gautam and Ronnie. And on behalf of our host, Intel, I would like to invite you all now to join for dinner and a moment of relaxation after this afternoon of discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you.